Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever been asked to do something that seemed ridiculous, so small, so strange, that you questioned its purpose? What if I told you that putting salt in your toilet, it might be the most powerful spiritual act you could do today? Now, let's be clear, this isn't about plumbing, this is about purpose. Salt, in ancient times, was sacred. It was used to preserve, to purify, and even to seal covenants. It wasn't just seasoning, it was a sign of sanctity. The toilet, on the other hand, represents the dirty, hidden, flushed away parts of our lives, the secrets, the shame, the habits no one sees but us and God. When you put salt in your toilet, you're not just cleaning a bowl. You're making a bold declaration. God, I'm ready to cleanse what I've ignored. I'm ready to release what I've been ashamed of. I'm willing to honor even the hidden places of my life. Sometimes the miracle starts in the messiest rooms of our house and in the messiest corners of our heart. God doesn't always speak in thunder. Sometimes he whispers, put salt here, do this, trust me. And when you obey in the small, God moves in the great. When you take an act that seems foolish and fill it with faith, heaven takes notice. Salt in the toilet, maybe that's symbolic of your decision to stop holding in bitterness, to flush away resentment, to pour purity into places where you've only felt shame. Let me tell you this, God moves when you move. He honors even the strangest steps when they come from trust. You might not see it instantly, but just like you don't see what happens behind the walls when you flush, something shifts, something breaks, something is removed. You're not doing this for show. No one else may ever know, but you will, and God will. This isn't superstition. This is symbolism, an outward act of an inward decision. So today, I challenge you, go to the place you hide your wastes, spiritually and emotionally, and pour in the salt of obedience, the salt of faith, the salt of trust. Salt, throughout history and across cultures, has carried profound meaning, far beyond just flavoring food. It has been revered as a sacred substance, a divine purifier, and a symbol of preservation, covenant, and even spiritual power. In biblical times, salt was so valued that it was used in offerings to God, symbolizing purity, loyalty, and an unbreakable agreement. When covenants were made, salt was sometimes exchanged to seal the trust, signifying something incorruptible, something eternal. Salt doesn't just preserve meat or enhance taste. It prevents decay. It fights against corruption. It purifies water, heals wounds, and even cleanses the environment of negative energy. In ancient rituals and religious practices, salt was sprinkled in temples, homes, and even on the ground to drive away evil, negative spirits, or stagnant energies. It was never just about utility, it was about symbolism, a small substance with mighty power, a grain that carried the weight of spiritual truth. When we look at salt today, especially in the context of a speech like this, we're not talking about its place in the kitchen. We're talking about its deeper, almost mystical symbolism. We're talking about what happens when something that represents purity, divine preservation, and spiritual power is intentionally placed where we normally discard, flush, or hide. We're talking about honoring the sacredness of transformation, not in grand temples, but in the most overlooked spaces of our lives. Salt, then, becomes more than mineral. It becomes a message, a quiet but potent reminder that purity begins in intention, that the smallest act, done in spiritual alignment, can carry immense weight. It reminds us that what the world sees as ordinary, like a handful of salt, is often chosen by God to perform extraordinary things. On the surface, a toil, it is just a household necessity, practical, unglamorous, and often ignored unless something goes wrong. But if you stop and reflect, it's actually one of the most symbolic places in your entire home. It's where waste is discarded. It's where we flush away what our bodies no longer need. It represents release, removal, and renewal. And when we look at it through a spiritual lens, the toilet becomes a powerful metaphor for the parts of our lives we don't want others to see, the parts we often don't want to see ourselves. Think about it. The toilet is hidden away in the bathroom, behind closed doors. Just like the emotional, mental, and spiritual waste we carry, shame, regret, resentment, hidden sins, unspoken trauma, it's buried deep. We may clean our homes, dress ourselves well, and put on a polished front, but deep down, there are inner rooms we haven't dared to face. The toilet symbolizes those inner places, the ones we neglect, ignore, or try to hide because they remind us of our weaknesses, our past, or our pain. And yet, that is exactly where the transformation begins, not in the living room, where everything appears perfect, but in the spiritual bathrooms of our lives. The toilet stands for honesty. It stands for the raw, unfiltered truth of what must be let go in order to be free. It reminds us that no matter how much we hold on to something, if it's toxic, it must be released. Spiritually, the toilet is where we symbolically flush what is no longer serving us. Just like in life, we must release the thoughts, relationships, and behaviors that no longer align with who we're becoming. The toilet becomes a mirror of our inner world. It challenges us to look at what we've stored up: emotional clutter, spiritual blockages, hidden guilt, and deal with it head on. Not with fear or disgust, but with intention and surrender. Using a toilet as a symbol may seem unconventional, even jarring, but that's precisely why it's powerful. It forces us to shift our focus from the polished and performative to the real and raw. It invites us into a place of humility, a place where ego can't survive, and honesty is the only way forward. The toilet is the hidden altar where we confront what we've avoided, what we've buried, and what we desperately need to release. Spiritual cleansing is not just a ritual, it's a necessity for anyone seeking clarity, peace, and connection with the divine. Just as we wash our bodies to stay physically clean, our spirits too need cleansing from the invisible residue that life leaves behind. Every day, we are exposed to negativity, stress, emotional burdens, toxic thoughts, and energetic pollution. These things attach themselves to us, not visibly, but spiritually, and over time, they clog our inner flow, just like waste builds up in a neglected drain. This is where the ancient power of salt comes in. For centuries, salt has been revered as a substance that doesn't just preserve, it purifies. In spiritual practices, salt is considered one of the most effective tools for absorbing negative energy, repelling dark forces, and restoring balance. It is seen as a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, a simple, earthly element that carries the weight of divine symbolism. Whether it's sprinkled in sacred spaces, dissolved in cleansing baths, or placed in doorways to guard against negative energies, salt has always been used as a spiritual purifier. When we speak of putting salt in a toilet, We're not just performing a household trick, we're engaging in a symbolic act of spiritual release. The toilet, as previously described, represents the hidden, often shame-filled parts of our lives. Adding salt to it becomes a visual and intentional act of surrendering those unseen burdens to God, asking not only for emotional release, but for spiritual cleansing at a deep core level. This type of cleansing goes beyond the surface. It's about flushing away anger you've held for too long, pain you never processed, guilt that eats away at your joy, and trauma that quietly drains your energy. It's about cleansing environments, relationships, and inner patterns that no longer align with your growth or your divine path. Just like salt melts into water and becomes part of the cleansing process, your act of surrender melts your resistance and allows divine healing to enter. Spiritual cleansing isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's private, humble, and deeply personal. You may be alone in your bathroom, no one watching, with a simple handful of salt. But in that small, quiet moment, something sacred begins. You are acknowledging your spiritual hygiene. You are saying, God, I don't want to carry this anymore. I want to be free. Cleanse me not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, and spiritually. One of the most overlooked aspects of spiritual growth and divine breakthrough is obedience, not in the grand gestures, not in public displays, but in the quiet, small acts that seem insignificant to the outside world. Throughout history, we see a consistent pattern. When people obey the divine in small, sometimes unusual ways, something extraordinary is set in motion. These actions might appear strange, even foolish, but when rooted in trust, they become the seed of transformation. Obedience is not always about understanding. It's about alignment. It's about responding when your spirit is nudged, even if your mind can't fully comprehend the reason. It's about following through with what God places on your heart, no matter how minor or odd it may seem. The act of putting salt in a toilet, for instance, may feel silly, irrelevant, or unnecessary. But what if the action itself is not the point? What if it's the obedience behind the action that carries the power? Sometimes the key to unlocking divine intervention isn't in your loudest prayer, but in your quietest surrender. God often tests our hearts through the small things. Will you follow that strange instruction? Will you obey when no one is watching? Will you trust when it doesn't make sense? The truth is, obedience in small acts reveals a deep level of humility and surrender. It means you're not just doing what you think is right. You're listening, you're tuning in, you're sensitive to spiritual direction. It means you're saying, God, I trust you more than I trust my own logic. The scriptures and spiritual teachings across many traditions show us time and again how the miraculous is hidden in the mundane. A shepherd's staff, 5 smooth stones, a touch of a garment, a cup of water. These simple, earthly things became the vehicles through which heaven revealed its power, not because of what they were, but because someone obeyed. When God sees that you are faithful in little things, He knows you can be trusted with more. The small act becomes the doorway to a greater blessing. Obedience becomes the language of alignment, and alignment is what invites divine movement into your life. Faith, true, deep, unshakable faith, often exists on the other side of logic. It is not confined to what can be calculated, explained, or proven. It doesn't always fit into the box of reason or the blueprint of common sense, and yet that's what makes it powerful, because faith at its core is not about what you can see, It's about what you believe in spite of what you see. It's about trusting in what you can't fully understand and moving forward even when it defies conventional wisdom. When you're told to put salt in your toilet and watch what God does, your first instinct may be to laugh it off, to question it, to overanalyze. Why salt? Why a toilet? What difference could that possibly make? That's logic trying to take the wheel. But faith speaks a different language. Faith says, I may not understand the reason, but I understand the one who gave the instruction. And that's all that matters. Time and again, spiritual breakthroughs have come not from rational decisions, but from irrational obedience. Think of the times in sacred texts when people were instructed to march around walls, dip in muddy rivers, or strike rocks to bring forth water. None of it made sense, until it did, until the walls fell, until healing came, until the impossible became reality. Why? Because someone chose to have faith beyond logic. This is what separates the spiritually mature from the spiritually stuck. Logic will always try to keep you safe, to keep you grounded in what's proven, but faith invites you to fly, a step into what's unseen, to move forward without full answers, and to believe that there is meaning even in the mysterious. It challenges you to step outside of the comfort of knowing and into the vast, open field of trust. Putting salt in your toil. It may never appear in any manual of religious doctrine, but that's not the point. The point is whether your heart is open enough, humble enough, and faith-filled enough to say, God, I trust you, even in this, even in something so small, so unusual, so seemingly insignificant, because that kind of faith catches heaven's attention. That kind of faith moves things in the unseen realm. Faith beyond logic doesn't mean you abandon reason. It means you submit reason to the higher wisdom of the divine. It means you walk not by sight, but by spiritual insight. You understand that your finite mind can never fully grasp the infinite plans of God, and so, instead of resisting what you don't understand, you lean in, you participate, you obey. One of the greatest mysteries of divine power is this: God does his most profound work in the places we cannot see. While we, as humans, are drawn to what is visible, measurable, and tangible, God operates in realms far beyond the surface. The unseen is where heaven moves. The invisible is where transformation often begins. And the sacred truth is, just because you can't see it, doesn't mean God isn't doing something powerful on your behalf. In fact, most of what God does starts quietly, secretly, in the background, beneath the surface. Just as seeds germinate in the dark soil long before they sprout above ground, so too does God prepare blessings, breakthroughs, and healing long before they show up in your visible life. There is a process happening underneath what you're experiencing. While you're focused on what you can see, God is working on what you can't. When you put salt in your toilet, for example, it seems like a trivial act, almost laughable to the rational mind. You flush it, and it disappears. There's no applause, no bolt of lightning, no dramatic sign, but in that small, private act, a spiritual message is sent. I believe in what I cannot see. I trust in what I do not yet understand. And it's in that moment of quiet obedience, of humble action without spectacle, that God begins to shift things invisibly in your atmosphere. The unseen realm is where spiritual battles are won. It's where generational curses are broken. It's where chains you didn't even know you were carrying are snapped off. It's where healing takes place in places medicine can't reach, your soul, your mind, your spirit. You may not feel the change immediately, but something starts to move. Something begins to lift. That anxiety you've been carrying loses its grip. That heaviness that followed you starts to break, not because of the salt itself, but because of the faith and surrender behind the act. God is not limited by what you see. He doesn't need to show you every step in order to take you forward. Sometimes he hides his work so you can focus on your part, trust, obedience, and continued faith. The greatest moves of God often happen in silence, in stillness, in the moments when it feels like nothing is happening. That's when everything is happening. So, while your logical mind may be waiting for signs and your eyes may be searching for evidence, remember this: the absence of proof is not the absence of power. Just because you can't see the shift doesn't mean the shift hasn't started. You are not waiting for God to move. He's already moving in the unseen, preparing things you didn't ask for, removing things you didn't know were harming you, and aligning you with things you didn't even imagine. Shame and guilt are some of the heaviest burdens a human soul can carry. They cling silently to our spirit, often long after the moment that caused them has passed. They don't shout, but they whisper constantly. They whisper, "You're not enough." They whisper, "Look what you've done." They follow us into our quiet moments, into our relationships, into our decisions. And they become the invisible chains that keep us from fully stepping into peace, purpose, and connection with God. While guilt can sometimes be a signal from the conscience that something needs correction, to live under guilt and shame is something else entirely. That is spiritual imprisonment. It's a cycle of self-punishment that poisons joy, distorts identity, and distances us from the divine truth that we are loved, forgiven, and worthy of redemption. Now imagine the symbolism of pouring salt into a toilet, a place designed to carry away waste, and watching it disappear. That simple act becomes a powerful declaration. I'm no longer holding on to this. I'm done carrying what I was never meant to carry. You're not just letting go of physical waste. You're letting go of emotional and spiritual toxins that have taken root in your identity. You're symbolically surrendering the weight of regret, the lies of the past, and the false narratives that have kept you stuck. Shame thrives in silence and secrecy. It grows when we hide the parts of ourselves we think God or others would reject. But the truth is, the very areas you think disqualify you are often the ones God wants to heal and redeem the most. And that healing doesn't always start with a dramatic moment. It can begin in the most ordinary of places, like your bathroom, like your heart at 2 a.m., like a quiet decision to say no more. This is why the toilet becomes so symbolic in this process. It's a space of release. It's where waste belongs. And spiritually speaking, shame and guilt are forms of waste that must be released, not carried. God never intended for you to live in a constant cycle of regret. He did not create you to be buried beneath your mistakes. He created you with grace in mind, and grace doesn't just forgive, it frees. Letting go of shame and guilt is not about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about understanding that the past does not define you, that healing is possible, that restoration is available, that God can take the dirtiest, most broken pieces of your story and use them as the very thing that brings him glory. We often associate transformation with grand events, big changes, and loud, unmistakable signs. We expect the heavens to open, lightning to strike, or circumstances to change instantly, But divine transformation rarely begins with something massive. It almost always starts small, quietly, invisibly, in ways that seem insignificant, even forgettable at first glance. This is the nature of God's work. It unfolds in layers, and it begins in the soil of small obedience, small shifts, and small moments. Consider the mustard seed, one of the tiniest seeds in nature, but when planted, it grows into something strong and unshakable. The same principle applies to your spiritual journey. A minor act, like placing salt in your toilet, may not register as important to anyone else, but in the spiritual realm, it can signify the start of something monumental. Transformation doesn't need a stage, it needs sincerity. It needs the kind of faith that's willing to start with what you have, where you are, with what seems foolish to others. That's the beauty of divine work. It doesn't require perfection. It requires participation. God looks for willingness, not worthiness. He looks for openness, not outward signs of power. Placing salt in your toil. It may sound like a household hack to the world, but in the spiritual sense, it becomes a catalyst. It's a moment of intention, a conscious act of cleansing, a declaration that you're ready for more, that you're serious about releasing what's old to make room for what's new. That salt may dissolve into water, but your act of faith does not. It lingers, it echoes, it invites divine transformation to begin moving, often in ways you can't predict. Big breakthroughs often trace their origins back to tiny beginnings, a prayer whispered in the dark, a tear that no one saw, a decision made in secret. These are the places where heaven bends low, where angels gather, where change takes root, not in the roar of the crowd, but in the silence of personal surrender. The spiritual realm responds to consistency, humility, and intent, not spectacle. And sometimes God watches what you'll do when there's no audience, when there's no affirmation, when the act seems too small to matter. That's when He knows you're truly ready, because if you're faithful with little, He can entrust you with much more. The small step is never just a small step. It's a signal to heaven that you're ready for divine transformation. Renewal isn't something that happens once and lasts forever. It's something that must be pursued and practiced daily. Just as our bodies need rest each night and water each day, our spirits require regular renewal to stay strong, clean, and connected. Life is constantly throwing things at us: stress, disappointment, distractions, temptations, spiritual fatigue. And if we're not intentional about refreshing our inner world, we slowly become spiritually stagnant. Think of your toilet again, not just as a functional object, but as a symbol. It's something that gets used multiple times a day. Why? Because it is a place of release, a place where the body lets go of what it no longer needs. Now, imagine the spiritual parallel. If our bodies need to release waste regularly, then so do our spirits. We cannot afford to hold on to emotional toxins, anger, bitterness, jealousy, guilt, fear, and expect to live peacefully. These things pile up if we don't spiritually flush them out. That's where the idea of daily renewal comes in. It's the consistent act of checking in with your soul, examining your thoughts, and surrendering what doesn't belong anymore. It's choosing every single day to empty yourself of what's not of God so that you can be filled again with what is. And while this can happen through prayer, meditation, scripture, journaling, or reflection, it can also happen through small symbolic rituals, like placing salt in a toilet. That act may seem strange or trivial, but in a spiritual sense, it becomes a daily declaration. I release, I reset, I renew. The salt represents intentional purification. The toilet represents the place where it all goes. And by combining both, you're creating a sacred space in a secular room, a spiritual moment in an otherwise forgotten corner of your daily routine. You're reminding yourself that no part of your life is too ordinary to be touched by grace. Daily renewal doesn't require a perfect day or a perfect mindset. It just requires consistency. It's about waking up and saying, "Today, I choose to begin again." It's about being honest with yourself and with God. It's about recognizing that just like your home gathers dust, your spirit gathers clutter, and you need to wipe it clean again and again. When you live a life of daily renewal, you no longer wait for breakdowns to take action. You don't wait until things spiral out of control before you seek healing. You live in a constant rhythm of release and refreshment. You begin each day lighter because you've made it a habit to let go. You're no longer carrying the weight of weeks or months past. You're flushing it as it comes, cleansing your soul before buildup turns into bondage. Belief by itself is powerful, but belief that stays in your head and never moves into action is like a seed left unplanted. It holds potential, yes, but potential that never manifests. True belief isn't just about what you think, it's about what you do because of what you believe. And the moment belief becomes action, it transforms into a force that can alter atmospheres, shift realities, and invite divine movement into your life. We live in a culture that often defines belief by words, what we say we stand for, what we post online, what we repeat in affirmations. But real belief isn't proven in words, it's proven in motion. When you take action based on your faith, even when it feels strange or goes against logic, that's when belief becomes alive. That's when heaven takes notice. So what does that have to do with putting salt in your toilet? Everything. That act, simple as it may seem, is the manifestation of belief. It says, I don't just believe that God can cleanse and restore, I'm acting like I believe it. I'm participating. I'm not waiting to feel spiritual or see a sign. I'm stepping out with intention. And that's the difference between wishing for change and activating change. One is passive, the other is partnership. There is something deeply sacred about aligning your physical actions with your spiritual intentions. It creates a bridge between the unseen and the seen. It tells your mind, body, and spirit, we are moving together in faith. When your feet go where your faith is pointing, your life begins to shift. God responds not just to thought, but to movement. Scripture and sacred traditions alike are filled with examples where miracles followed action, not before it. Think of the woman who reached out to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. Her belief wasn't hidden in her heart. It moved her feet, stretched her hand, and changed her reality. Or the blind man who obeyed the strange instruction to wash in a specific pool. His healing came not when he believed, but when he acted on that belief. That's the power of belief in action. It's not about the salt. It's not about the toilet. It's about the faith that says, I will act, even when I don't fully understand. It's about saying, I'm not just going to hope for breakthrough, I'm going to move toward it. There is a divine rhythm woven into the fabric of our spiritual lives, a sacred partnership between the human and the holy, the physical and the supernatural. And at the core of that rhythm lies a powerful truth. When you move, God moves. This doesn't mean that God is waiting on you to earn His grace or manipulate His presence. No, this is about alignment. It's about stepping into the flow of faith that activates heaven's attention and opens the gates for divine movement. So many people wait for signs. They wait for the miracle, the opportunity, the breakthrough, never realizing that the shift they're longing for might be waiting on them to take the first step. All throughout sacred history, God didn't force movement on people, He invited it. He whispered, "Go." He said, "Stretch out your hand, take up your bed and walk. Launch out into the deep." The miracle didn't come before the movement. It came because of the movement. When you move, even in small ways, especially in small ways, you're declaring something powerful. I trust you, Lord. I don't need the full picture. I don't need a guarantee. I'm moving because you spoke, because I believe, because I'm ready. And in that moment, the spiritual realm shifts. Resources begin to align. Doors begin to open. Healing starts to flow. It may not look instant. It may not feel dramatic, but something has changed because you moved in faith. When you pour salt into your toilet as a symbolic act, you are engaging in more than a ritual. You are stepping into partnership with the divine. You're saying, I won't sit in spiritual paralysis anymore. I won't wait for things to change while I do nothing. I'm choosing to move first, to make room, to obey, to show I'm serious. And that movement, no matter how simple or odd it seems, is noticed by heaven. God doesn't need perfection. He needs participation. And your movement is not about fixing everything in a day. It's about proving your heart is open, that your spirit is aligned, that you're no longer stuck in fear, doubt, or indecision. Movement invites momentum, and momentum invites miracles. This principle is so consistent, so clear, that it almost becomes a law of the Spirit. What you do in faith, God honors in power. The move you make, no matter how humble, says to God, I'm ready. And when God hears that, He responds. Always. So the next time you walk into that quiet, forgotten corner of your home, the bathroom, and hold that simple grain of salt in your hand, remember this: it's not about the toilet, and it's not about tradition. It's about trust. It's about humility. It's about showing up in the smallest spaces with the greatest faith. You're not just cleansing porcelain. You're purifying your spirit. You're not just obeying blindly. You're walking in divine alignment. And as that salt falls into the water, let it carry every unspoken burden, every hidden wound, every silent prayer. Let it be your release, your symbol of surrender, your act of obedience. Then flush, not just waste, but fear. Flush the guilt, flush the doubt, flush every spiritual toxin you've been carrying around, because when you move in faith, even through a strange, quiet act like this, God moves in power, and the beauty of it is, you may not see it immediately, but heaven always sees, and heaven always responds.